Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event about the European Union's Digital Markets Act in action, detecting the regulation's early effects and its global reach. My name is Lilla Norakish, and I'm a senior policy analyst for the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. I would like to welcome you all and thank you all for joining us today. As the European Commission is enforcing the DMA since March 7, it's a perfect time to dive into its real-world impact on tech giants and beyond. The DMA sets a significant precedent for competition laws covering actors on the digital markets and specifically targeting 6 big, predominantly US-owned tech companies deemed as gatekeepers. However, the impact of the EU's regulation reaches beyond European borders. We can say that the Brussels effect is alive and well. Jurisdictions worldwide, Brazil, United Kingdom, India, Korea, Japan, are contemplating similar legislative measures inspired by the EU's pioneering approach. Today, our distinguished speakers will provide insight into the early effects of the DMA, explore its implications within Europe and beyond, and shed light on the ongoing legislative developments in their respective regions. Let me briefly introduce our esteemed panelists. Alba Rivera Martinez is a PhD candidate in competition law and lecturer in competition law at Universidad Carlos III de Madrid and Universidad Villanueva, Spain. Alba will provide a detailed analysis of the DMA's implementation, including compliance, workshops, outcomes, recent investigations against gatekeepers. Dario Oliveira Neto serves as the Director of Latin America Competition Advocacy Program at the Global Antitrust Institute, George Mason University, and the PhD candidate at the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil. Dario will discuss Brazil's digital markets bill and highlight the unique dynamics of the Brazilian market. Yusuf Choi is a professor of law at the Graduate School of International Area Studies, Hankook University of Foreign Studies in Seoul, Korea. Yusuf will provide insights into Korea's legislative endeavors targeting tech companies and how they compare to the EU's approach. Last but not least, Aurelian Portuis is a research professor and founding director of the George Washington University's Competition Innovation Lab, as well as a lawyer at Freshfields Brookhouse Deringer. Aurelian will shed light on the paradigm shift in the United States, showcasing the impact of the Brussels effect and its broader implications. Before we dive into the conversation, I would like to encourage our online viewers to actively participate by submitting questions via Slido for the Q&A session. Now, without further ado, let's start. Alba, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lila, for that wonderful presentation. And first of all, I would like to thank you and the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation for your invitation to participate in this panel and to provide the European viewpoint of digital rulemaking from the perspective of competition policy. Getting straight to the point, the Digital Markets Act, or the DMA, is a regulation that applies antitrust-like remedies to designated targets. Those are the gatekeepers. The DMA seeks out to ensure that digital markets remain contestable and fair, whereas it also aims to keep a harmonized approach towards digital regulation across all of the European Union. Going back to when the DMA was adopted, different member states within the Union were adopting their own dedicated and national rules applying to digital operations. That situation in particular led to fragmentation in the internal market, and the DMA was adopted to harmonize the patchwork of rules and regulations. Moreover, the institutional design of the DMA is not that of a horizontal regulation. The European Commission designated the gatekeepers based on the fact that they surpass certain thresholds in terms of their users and their market capitalization. 6 gatekeepers have been captured as a result of the European Commission's designation, as you said. The services that remain captured under the DMA are, however, not all of those provided by those same gatekeepers. 22 core platform services remain under the scope of the DMA, such as Google Search, Apple iOS, Amazon Marketplace, Facebook, Instagram, or the Windows PC OS. As opposed to the burden of proof lying with the public authority, in this case the European Commission, The DMA reverses the burden of intervention so that gatekeepers demonstrate how they comply in an effective manner with the substantive provisions of the regulation. The gatekeeper must then submit its technical solutions to the provisions via a compliance report, and then the European Commission checks whether the technical implementation, those solutions, are in line with the spirit and the letter of the law of the DMA. The European Commission, in the sense, is the DMA's sole enforcer, and national competition authorities do not play a role in terms of enforcing those same provisions. The deadline for compliance, as you said, was set out for 7th March. Therefore, we already have these 6 compliance reports published by the gatekeepers, where they set out in detail how they intend or how they already comply with the DMA in a substantive way. A month ago, the European Commission also organized a series of workshops where gatekeepers voluntarily participated to engage with stakeholders under the public limelight to gauge the extent and the scope of the compliance solutions that they had just proposed a couple of weeks back. And in the interim of those same workshops, the European Commission jumped the gun, so to say, by opening 5 non-compliance procedures against first, Alphabet on the counts of breaching the anti-steering and self-preferencing prohibitions under the DMA. Second, against Apple due to its compliance solutions, also related to anti-steering and their displaying of choice screens for web browsers, and against Meta for its pay or consent model. So, although the EU legislators' narrative when the DMA was first adopted was that of forcing the hand of big tech companies by establishing these per se rules upon the functioning of their business models, it was not entirely evident that the Commission would fundamentally pursue a stick without a carrot enforcement strategy. Now, it is quite clear that that is to be the case. And a few days ago, Vestager confirmed that the fight with the gatekeepers on antitrust would continue in the context of the DMA. Therefore, one also wonders what fundamental differences set apart antitrust from the DMA. In my own mind, the differences stem from the reversal of the burden of intervention. But in fact, the DMA lowers the burden of proof and the thresholds for intervention in favor of the European Commission. The DMA does away, for example, with definitions of the relevant market, findings of dominance, or any potential pro-competitive effects of these platforms' conduct. A breach of, for example, the prohibition of self-preferencing imposed upon these gatekeepers must not be necessarily preceded by any of these findings, nor of the presence of consumer harm. This is therefore a crucial step that the EU legislator has taken away from the more economic approach to a regulatory-like regime to try to envelop gatekeepers. And in terms of the intended and unintended consequences deriving from the regulation, it's early days to try to benchmark effective enforcement of the DMA. In this sense, the DMA provides huge scope for leeway to read some provisions in a real narrow way, or to apply a wide and all-encompassing interpretation for other types of provisions. The European Commission's current stance in interpreting the DMA's provisions is also coherent with this same motion. And against this background, and in light of the discussion that we will be having in a minute, there is a great risk for other jurisdictions to just replicate the current enforcement strategy of the Commission and the DMA's provisions mimetically. As it is now being enforced and in its current configuration and within its enforcement strategy, the DMA is an all-encompassing tool in the hands of the competition authority so that it can procedurally cut some corners that hinder its economically sound enforcement of antitrust. But at the same time, it aims to achieve those same outcomes. So in the end, via the DMA's punitive provisions, the Commission may reach the same result without having to go through a lengthy and resource-intensive process required by those sanctioning proceedings. It can fine gatekeepers, for example, for up to 10% of its worldwide turnover for a one-off violation, whereas those fines can go up as high as 20% in case of repeated violations in the period of 8 years. So with this, I'll also pass the floor to just stop, I believe, and I really look forward to the discussion in a few minutes' time.
Okay, Yusuf, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Actually, it's a very light night in Korea, but maybe it's morning time there, right? First of all, I mean, it's my great pleasure to talk about the current issues of digital regulation in Korea. And as I only have 8 minutes, I will briefly talk about 2 issues. First, it's very important to understand the political situation in Korea. Actually, last December, the Korea Fair Trade Commission, the KFTC, announced the bill of the Platform Competition Promotion Act, and its content seemed very similar to that of the European Digital Markets Act. And according to the KFTC press release, the new regulation may include provisions for the designating large platforms and the prohibiting certain types of the conducts, including self-preferencing, restriction of the multi-homing, and imposing most favored nation clause and time. So the bill draft has not been published yet. So, but the bill is likely to resemble the DMA because the implementation of the Korean competition rules on the abuse of market dominance is already very similar to the that of the European Article 102 TIFU. So KFTC emphasized its focus on the preventing market dominant platforms from abusing their powers by designating the those platforms in advance, and it will be a sort of the ex-ante regulation. But the initial plan to finalize its bill was delayed after its announcement last December, because of the strong opposition from the Korean companies and the other political regions. But after the general elections last week, the KFTC seemed to restart the process of the reviewing the contents of the bill by gathering opinions from stakeholders. In the last week elections, the Democratic Party, which is really progressive, had a big victory. So actually, the Democratic Party has also proposed strong digital regulation over the last few years. And this means discussions on the adopting new digital regulation will resume sooner or later at the National Assembly, the Congress. So Democratic Party is very supportive of the digital regulations. So it is very likely that the intensity and scope of the substantive provisions in its bills may be strength and maybe stronger than the KFTC proposal. So at the moment, actually, this is not really clear or certain which legislative proposal, either from the KFTC or the National Assembly, will be supported this year. But the chance of the adopting new digital regulation is very high. Also, the conclusion of the elections, just as I said, may make the KFTC accelerate the discussions on the new digital regulations. So many, at the time, I mean, at this moment, actually, many critics believe that the government and the National Assembly will not face any big obstacles. Second point is about the Korean competition law. So it's really also very important to understand the Korean competition law and policy. Actually, we have very strong competition law, and the KFTC has actively applied the competition rules, and the number of the KFTC decisions in the last 40 years is more than the 15,000, which is really a lot. And the KFTC has been successful in many cases, including the digital cases, like the self-referencing. So many antitrust professors in Korea argue against the new types of the digital regulation because, I mean, obviously the existing competition rules are sufficient to regulate the abusive conducts of large platforms. But again, it's all about the politics. So we need to wait and see. So this is all of the my comment. Thank you.
Dario, please go ahead.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank ITIF and especially Lila for inviting me here. It's such a pleasure to participate in such an interesting panel. So let's turn ourselves to Brazil right now. I divided this initial speech in 3 different parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk as what I see as this broader movement of digital markets regulation, not only for antitrust, which I think is only one topic of this broader movement of different initiatives that we're having back there in Brazil. Then the second part, I'm going to talk about the Brazilian bill 2768, known as the Brazilian DMA that we have nowadays in the Brazilian Congress. And then in the third part, I'm going to discuss a little bit about this most recent development in this specific area of competition policy that we have back there in Brazil, which is the public consultation that was released by the Brazilian Ministry of Finance in January. Okay, so in this first part, I think like although we are in a DMA panel, I believe that I must give you this view that we have like this broader movement regarding digital markets regulation, not only for antitrust, not only for competition policy. And I would say that this is not, at least in Brazil, the most discussed topic nowadays. But I believe that is a similar movement that we can also be seeing in Europe, for example, and one cannot understand of the discussions related to competition policy if you don't see like this general and broader movement. So, for example, we have a really big discussion in Brazil about Bill 2630, which is, depending on your political view, you can say that is the fake news bill or the censorship bill, but it's a bill that aims to regulate and gives and creates legal responsibilities to digital markets and digital platforms regarding the regulation of fake news and the spreading of false information through the platforms, mainly related to elections. So this is another topic that really influence digital markets, but not in the antitrust way that we're seeing for DMA, for example. But we do have other different bills, for example. So we have like Bill 2338, which the Brazilian Bill of AI regulation, which has a lot of similarities to the AI Act that was passed, I believe, 1 month ago in Europe, for example. It's been discussed in the Senate, and I believe that we'll have some further movement in Brazil. Bill 2628, which is a bill that aims to protect and regulate the type of context that, for example, children and teenagers can see, can be exposed on digital platforms. And we do have other different types of bills, so related to Uber drivers and e-commerce with Chinese websites that really have like some important economic activities back there in Brazil. So this just to give you this broader notion that the DMA bill that I'm gonna start talking about now is just like one topic that I see as a broader movement, and this must be in your mind when you're talking, at least in Brazil, but I believe also in Europe, about what is happening on digital markets. So to the second part now, Bill 2768 was a bill that was presented and submitted to the Brazilian House of Representatives in the end of 2022, so like 1.5 years ago. And it's undeniable that DMA has affected this bill. Actually, there is one part of the bill, which is the justification, where the congressman who drafted the bill gives his motivations of why he thinks that this bill was needed for the Congress, in order to be enacted by the Brazilian Congress. And he directly cites, for example, and in antitrust terms, it's kind of funny to think, because he kind of mix, for example, Tim Wu's work and also Chairwoman Lina Khan's work when she was in the Congress. So he gives some ideas of this new Brandeisner movement that's happening here in the US with the DMA in Europe. So he mixed these antitrust movements in the US and Europe in order to say, okay, we kind of need this bill in Brazil. But he also states that this bill was supposed to be like a softer version of the DMA, not having as like those strict rules that we have in the DMA, the obligations that we have in the DMA. Unfortunately, I will not have time to explain all the ideas and rules of the bill, but I believe that for almost all the antitrust scholars back then in Brazil, it is known that the bill has some real problems with these current statutory text that we have nowadays. And just to give you like one example, for Article 9. Article 9 is the threshold rule for gatekeepers, for designation of gatekeepers. And the rule is that every digital company that has annual turnover, annual revenue of more than 70 million reais, which is around, I don't know, 15 million of dollars, would be designated as a gatekeeper. In this sense, for example, CCIA estimated that nowadays 187 companies would be designated as a gatekeeper in Brazil. So even for those who are totally in favor of DMA, of a DMA kind of regulation, the international discussion that we're having nowadays is the DMA, or the Digital Markets Regulation, was supposed to be an asymmetrical regulation only focused for big technological companies. And if you take as comparison Europe, that has like 6 companies, having a DMA regulation that would have 187 companies would not fulfill any kind of goal that one would try to achieve. Related to its status, I would say that now this is kind of stuck in the Congress, so it is inside a committee. We haven't seen any forward moving the last months, and I believe that at least in the short or the medium run, we will not have a direct movement of this bill. But the third and last, really briefly, part that I'm going to talk about, which is the most recent development, is the public consultation, the economic and competitive impacts of large digital platforms, which was released by the Brazilian Ministry of Finance in January. This public consultation was designed to make like broad questions about market failures, if it is needed some kind of regulation or not in Brazil, which regulator was supposed to impose those kind of rules. And I believe this regulation, it is important, it is open nowadays, and I would advise everyone that it is interested in this topic to give their opinions to the public government in Brazil. And I think that this is important because I believe the idea of this public consultation, since it is being done by the current administration, is to form the opinion of the current administration about this particular topic. So as a result of this consultation, depending in how the opinions will be and the end and the consequence of this consultation, I believe that if the government would be in favor of this consultation, we would be able to see some kind of movement regarding DMA and digital market regulation for competition policy in Brazil. Because as the other topics that I said, firstly, we do know what is the opinion of the current administration. However, regarding this specific topic, we do not know. But yeah, I'm gonna close here my topic, and then I'll be able to discuss further in the second round. Thank you, Lila.
Thank you, Dario. Aurelian, it's your turn.
All right. Thank you very much, Leila, for having me. So first disclaimer, I'm talking in my capacity as a GW professor. I'm not talking in my capacity as a lawyer at Freshfields, or I don't represent Freshfields or any Freshfields clients in the discussion that I'm gonna have. So first, let me just take a step back, perhaps talking about what's the DMA and where are we now, because I think it's a critical time, and we have to remember what the DMA is all about. DMA is about regulatory dialogue between the so-called gatekeepers and the European Commission. And there's a massive dilemma now for the European Commission in that regulatory dialogue. Well, the dilemma is simple. Isn't it just break open this regulatory dialogue and just go for ex post enforcement of the DMA in a very traditional litigation-driven enforcement, or you keep this regulatory dialogue alive, but as any dialogue, you need trust and you need transparency, or you need, and I mean, it's clearly quite surprising. I mean, just the timing, right? The DMA just got really implemented in March just now. 18 days after, you get all these non-compliance measures. Okay, that's pretty quick. Second, at the same time, you have those workshops in the back door, you prepare those non-compliance measures. So everybody's trying to be nice in this workshop and trying to be compliant. And the European Commission is trying to give some hints or insights of how to comply, but at the same time, it's preparing some non-compliance measures with that time. And of course, we cannot forget that we are just few months before the European elections, right? So just timing is like, okay, well, there's a political element. We cannot just take politics out of the picture. So that is like a real threat for just a regulatory dialogue. I mean, you want people to come at the table and speak, but if they don't trust you, they don't come at the table. So that's, I mean, how do you have the European Commission making sure that you have compliance by bringing those gatekeepers at the table and getting into this regulatory dialogue that, you know, Nobel laureate John Tyrrell called participative antitrust. Okay, let's do participative antitrust. The participative antitrust means that when you meet in workshops, you have to be quite transparent, and you say, okay, that's what I expect. Let's work together. And it's not 18 days after. You know, there's no urgency. Like, DMA is a long-going process for the many months and years, if not decades to come. So we have an issue here in the sense that we really need to make sure that the regulatory dialogue is not broken. And I mean, to be honest, I wish it's not broken, but I'm a bit skeptical. So why we need the regulatory dialogue to work? Well, for many reasons. First, because it's the very essence of the DMA. You cannot have ex-ante regulation with ex-post enforcement. That's it. Otherwise, you just don't do ex-ante regulation. Ex-ante regulations will be just a piece of paper in the shelf, and you just do traditional ex-post enforcement of antitrust rules. And so what's the whole point? I mean, other than just a political movement. And second of all, I mean, the European Commission has to be careful what you wish for, because if it just starts like doing litigation, it may be very much outgunned by those gatekeepers in courts. So, I mean, just look at the Article 22 Advocate General decisions, opinions, Nicholas Mbu. It's just like you may have very uncertain outcomes where the court really undermined the European Commission's policy or creative theory when it comes to enforcing mergers, checking mergers. So you have to be careful. I mean, the regulatory dialogue is a strength for the European Commission. And that's like, without using too much resources, without going to court, without the uncertainty of the litigation outcomes, it can get perhaps what he wants somehow. The litigation is way more uncertain, way more resource consuming, and it's just not what the European Commission wants. That's the point of the DMA. And so the gatekeepers will like it because they will be protracted in some very long litigation processes, and the European Commission will like it as well because that's not the point of the DMA. So it's a lose-lose situation, and we don't want that. I mean, we don't want. I mean, AI is developing at a rapid pace. You just don't want to be protected in litigation processes. And look at the case of Intel, where they started the process in 2008, and we just got the decision in 2022. So we can do litigation processes for 15 years, but the digital markets, as you enforce them now, as they're going to look like in 15 years, they're going to be totally different, right? And it would be irrelevant. So the real threat for the DMA is to fall into irrelevance because the regulatory dialogues is broken, and you just come back to traditional ex-post antitrust enforcement. And that's a failure. In the US, which is very briefly, no antitrust bill has passed other than just a Merger Enforcement Act, which is like not too bad of a change in terms of merger filings. But there's a massive skepticism also about exporting the DMA in the US. And there's a growing, I mean, I was hearing Yusuf too. So it was just, in Korea, there's also a growing skepticism. So the idea that we know DMA is going to be a success is just now really much shattered, because 18 days after the compliance to have non-compliance measures is itself not a proof of success. To go through litigation is not a proof of success for DMA. The proof of success of DMA is precisely not to use non-compliance measures, not to use litigation measures, and to have what the gatekeepers, what the European want the gatekeepers to do. But for that, you have, of course, to have a transparent and faithful regulatory dialogue, but you also have to explain key provisions in the DMA that are just totally undefined. Just take a couple of points. Integrity. What is integrity of the device? No one knows. I mean, we still don't know. Proportionality. All right, how do you apply a proportionality principle in making sure that every measures from Article 5, Article 6 are proportionate? No one knows. The European Commission say the DMA itself is proportionate, so we don't have to make sure that the measures are proportionate. But that's not how the courts and the judges look at it. The judge wants proportionality everywhere, and that's fair and very legitimate. So unless we define key concepts, integrity, proportionality, as part of a regulatory dialogue that is truthful and faithful, then we don't know what we're talking about, and we will just lead to non-compliance measures and protracted litigation, which is itself the sign of failure of the DMA. Thank you. I can come back.
Thanks, Aurélien. You all have made some very vital points on the DMA's reality and also on its tangible effects on foreign jurisdictions. Alba, do you think that it is possible to find a solution to the tensions between regulatory and competition tools that are in the DMA?
I would say that is the key question to address when we are talking about the DMA. Also, a caveat and building upon briefly on Aurélien's remarks, I really agree on the need to maybe advance the discourse, in the sense that, okay, we can assume that digital enforcement in antitrust was not successful, but then the alternative cannot be the same as antitrust. So if we move forward towards the DMA, then we cannot have this stick without a carrot enforcement, especially because then if the European Commission knocks on the door of gatekeepers will refuse to engage in those regulatory dialogues. So or not refuse, but maybe provide a bit of performative analysis on whether they see compliance lying on one side or another one. And also on the note of transparency, I would say that the DMA lacks transparency, not only in terms of engagement with stakeholders, but also with regards of its establishment of the DMA as a corpus of law. In other words, the DMA is not only the provisions that are ingrained within the regulatory instrument. The European Commission has added on additional provisions through this regulatory template that it has adopted throughout this last year, where it has added on additional obligations upon the gatekeepers. So there we have another element to the element of transparency. And circling back to the question, Lila, I would say that this tension with regulation and antitrust, we are really seeing it in terms of the regulation that other member states are also adopting now, with the German proposal and adoption of the Section 19A Competition Act, where the paradigmatical example of how those complementarities may play in practice were demonstrated when the German Competition Authority applied the same remedies under the DMA for non-core platform services under the DMA for Google. So it's a bit weird at the moment being, because if anything, the DMA is not designed to achieve this fragmentation objective, at least with its current institutional design.
Can we add on that, on the fragmentation? I think it's a key part. I think earlier, Alba, you said that the DMA was adopted because of the risk of fragmentations. And I just want to very quickly push back on that, because that's not the case. And there were some proposals. There were no rules. When Margaret Vestager made the proposal in December 2020, there was no rules. The Germans came with the proposal in January 2021. So there was absolutely no rules at the national level when it comes to digital regulations. I think it's, as a written mentioned, I think the DMA is the source of fragmentation, because it pushes precisely national competition authorities or member states to just there's a bidding offer where you just want to do even more than the DMA. And if the DMA comes to some settlements with the gatekeepers or some understanding or not compliance measures, then you have some member states will say, yes, I can do more, or I should be doing more. So I think the DMA, it didn't just provide sufficient safeguards against fragmentations. And we now know, I mean, when you read about the European Commission point of view on telco, on telecommunications, now we all agree, it seems like we all agree we need more concentrations, because the problem is of scale and the lack of single market in the telcos. And we don't have single market in the digital sector as well. So the main thing is the regulatory barriers between member states. And this fragmentation is precisely the anti-scale, these economies of scopes, or these economies of scale, if you want, that kill European startups and prevents foreign companies, American companies, or even others, to invest and just use the economies of scale of a single market. So this fragmentation is, I think, is key to just the success of the European economy, and yet we take it very lightly. We just don't take it very seriously at the design of the DMA when it was in December 2020, just 1 month after the Germans to say, okay, thank you, but we don't care. And now I think there's more proposals at the different levels where we see these fragmentations just increasing. So I think it's a real challenge for the European Commission to re-centralize the DMA. That I will be totally like a kind of preemption clause. Like, there shouldn't be on those topics local DMAs. There should be at least one-stop shop, which is the European Commission. I don't know how the European Commission is going to find a way to do that in terms of enforcement, but they should work hard in preventing those fragmentations. Yeah.
And if I may skip into the conversation, we have also to remember that the fragmentation is not only within the EU, but with between the EU and the rest of the world. So now, for example, Apple has just developed and has created this new version adapted to the DMA's obligations for Europe, and another version applies to the rest of the world. So we do not only have this fragmentation within the member states, despite the legal basis of the DMA being that of harmonization, but also with the rest of the world.
Yes, I think you touched a very important point, and as I see, we have a very, very engaged audience. We get some questions, and one of the questions is exactly connected to the user experience with the how the users are experiencing the effects of the DMA. But do you want to share your thoughts on this? What noticeable changes in the terms of access to service, privacy protections, consumer choice, users experience with the DMA?
From the front end user experience in the EU, that change has been quite noticeable, indeed, especially in terms of this application of the obligation seeking to introduce this contestability concept and component. In other words, those mandates and those provisions within articles, especially 6, that aim to eliminate these barriers to entry and expansion to these platforms. For instance, users can easily change their browser defaults with a few taps on their smartphones, since gatekeepers, Apple and Google, are now showing these choice screens, enabling to seamlessly change their browsers. But on the other side, as we just talked about, insofar as Apple is developing its App Store only for the EU, then all of the competitors to Apple on the browser side also have to develop their own versions regarding only the EU territory, separately from the version they will release regarding the rest of the world. And in terms of privacy, the DMA applies in principle without prejudice to any other piece of regulation, including data protection regulation, although we might think, and we might already see, that that is not to be the case. For example, yesterday's EDPB order on Meta's pay or consent model was quite evident that that is not to be the case. So we have, for now, we have not seen any fundamental shifts in terms of the protection of privacy with regards to European users, aside from the few reactions that we have seen from the gatekeepers seeking to gather consumer consent to override the prohibition of this processing, combining, cross-using of personal data in their core platform services. And one such example, which is currently quite topical with this EDPB order, is Meta's displaying of a binary choice, allowing end users to select whether they wish to first allow the platform to process and combine their personal data for the purposes of personalized advertising, and therefore continue enjoying the service for free, or on the other side, whether the end user wishes to protect their personal data and thus pay a subscription fee. I believe now it's around $10, so that Meta does not process their personal data for those advertising purposes. Although that does not really mean that Meta is not going to process their personal data at all. It will not apply that personal data, and it will not process that personal data for those advertising purposes. And that's what Meta pointed out in its contributions to the compliance workshops.
Thank you so much, Alba. The next question from the audience is for Dario. In the light of the European experience with the DMA, how do you foresee the proposed digital markets bill impacting the competitive landscape in Brazil?
Sure. So I believe that at this stage, it's kind of hard to see or to give an opinion for a foresee impact of the proposed bill, because I believe we have like a common sense that the proposal tax is not going to be the one. If any kind of tax would be enacted, the tax that we have nowadays is not going to be the one that's going to be applied or enacted by the Brazilian Congress. However, I believe, or the thing that I would like to see nowadays in Brazil is to start a discussion on this topic, because we just jumped. We just took as a Brussels effect, and we just jumped to having kind of this discussion in Brazil to a proposed bill that would impose the kind similar measures that is being imposed by the DMA. And that's the thing that I fear most in Brazil, because just importing some bill from a different country with different problems, with different markets, importing for a developing country that has a totally different markets, digital markets compared to Europe. Like if we take Europeans digital markets, the benchmark for applying or for enacting DMA kind of regulation, will not say that Brazil is also the kind of digital markets that would need this kind of regulation. Maybe we have like some different problems. Maybe we have like even bigger problem. I'm not sure, but for sure, like just importing this type of bill without any discussion, just like having a proposed bill and say, yeah, because Europe did like this, I believe that Brazil also needs to do like that. This is the thing that I see that I fear the most. And so like, but just answer the question, I believe that the proposed bill that we have nowadays is not going to be the one, if enacted, the one with the text that we have nowadays. But I believe that we do need some kind of discussions in order to see if those bill should be implemented or not, but at least to have a different view, or like a legitimate view of the problems that we have in other jurisdictions.
Thanks so much, Dario. I think we could ask exactly the same question from yourself, how the digital markets bill is going to impact the competitive landscape in Korea, in your opinion.
Okay, well, first of all, I mean, I need to explain some differences. Actually, the situation in the Korean digital market is very different from those of the European or American or Brazilian, digital markets, because, I mean, we have really successful and strong local Korean platforms. Actually, we don't use Amazon. Actually, we hardly use Amazon, or we don't use the Google search because we have really good service providers in Korea. So that means like actually the proposed bill of the digital regulation in Korea may target not only US big techs like Google or Meta, but also the mainly will target the Korean platforms. So this kind of the situation actually and the new digital regulation actually may bring some problem of the reverse discrimination against the Korean platforms and companies. So I believe the a DMA type regulation will chill innovation in Korea and also harm consumer welfare, because I mean this kind of the regulation focus on the protecting business users or smaller companies than the end users or the consumers. And interesting is like Korean startups also seem to disagree on the new digital regulation, because I mean eventually I mean this kind of the regulation will control the digital sector and market. So that's a big problem. Okay, that's all.
Thank you so much. As I see, we have also a question for Aurelian from the audience. On the other side of the Atlantic, what about any initiative from US lawmakers on the same topic beyond Lina Khan's statements?
All right. So, yeah. Well, before answering these questions, let me go back to the practical benefits or whatever of the DMA. I mean, short answer is: if you loved the screen choices about cookies under the GDPR, where you always click at every web page, if you allow those cookies or don't allow those cookies, you're gonna love the DMA, because it's gonna be all about screen choices and clicking and unclicking, and the parameters that you've set up yesterday will be forgotten and you have to set up again. So I'm not sure the user experience is going to be improved, first, and second of all, the big beneficiaries would be the big rivals, because when you have a screen choices, you have like 3-4 choices. What about the 20 other startups that are not listed? So how do you make those choices? I mean, you may have like 4 or 5 companies, so it's going to be basically the kind of the same companies that we all know. And is that going to be a success for the DMA? I'm not sure. And that's some more fundamental questions that I want to just raise very quickly. Is that the DMA is mostly about intra-platform competition, promoting competition in the platform with interoperability, screen choices. It doesn't disrupt the gatekeepers, doesn't fundamentally change their position. It kind of sometimes reinforce them. It's not about inter-platform competition where you want to disrupt the gatekeeper precisely with other technologies such as AI. And so that's very unfortunate, because the DMA is about this fairness on those gatekeepers. It's not about contestability of the gatekeeper itself. And so you may end up with the DMA having like good gatekeepers who just innovate less because they're chained by European regulators, and at the same time, the startups or the very small businesses just don't see absolutely no benefits of the DMA, and the user experience is just being worsened. So I think that's a real threat, and I think that we start knowing that okay, the DMA is all about intra-platform competition, not about inter-platform competition. And the best way of having inter-platform competition is, well, through AI or through disruptive technologies in this kind of Schumpeterian competition that I say that because of the Schumpeter project. Anyway, so the other question is about in the US. I think we haven't had any antitrust bills in the US that passed. There's a real skepticism about this kind of GDPR approach where you always ask the users those questions. The user experience should be, I mean, every entrepreneur knows that, should be flawless, but when you want the users to be vertically integrated, and you want the user experience to be flawless, and the DMA is the opposite of that. I mean, few examples. One interesting point is like, for example, DMA, you see that Apple has changed its RCS, a message protocol, which surprisingly is at the core of the DOJ suit in Apple, but the blue bubble and green bubbles when you do iMessage on Apple. So I think this is going to be this kind of very anecdotal examples that we're going to have with the DMA. Like, okay, you don't have green bubbles, but you have blue bubbles. great. That's the success of the DMA. And I think if we end up having these kind of outcomes, it's very sad. I mean, so anyway.
Alba, as I see, you would like to add something here.
Yes,
go ahead.
On the side of the green and blue bubbles, actually, Apple's e-message was not designated as a gatekeeper, so we cannot attribute that win to the DMA, but it's kind of there. And on the side of the effects of the DMA, I also believe that enforcement and the possible circumvention of the DMA will also come from the fact that gatekeepers have now the power to entitle every single business user that depends on them. So they can authorize for example, what browsers get into those choice screens, or or what developers can show and their apps in their web pages, so that users can download them there. So I believe that maybe the locus of the analysis is going to shift from the bottleneck experience to the middleware authorization process.
How many choices is screen choice? How many choices is screen choice? Like you have 4, you use it 4, 1 out 6, or 1 out 10. I mean, you have 4 companies in the screen choice. I mean, if I'm the 5th company, I can complain. And if I have 5, 1 out 10, 1 out 12, how big the screenshot should be? I don't know, and that's a big question. So it's just like you have to go to the kind of each time you click, you have to go to the yellow pages to see all the companies that can offer the service. It's just, I don't think it's improved the user experience.
These are all very important questions. Aurélien, in a nutshell, what lessons the USA or other jurisdictions could learn from the EU's approach?
Well, wait and see. Just we have the March compliance date, 18 days after non-compliance measure, which is itself a failure not a failure. It's perhaps too harsh of a word, but it's a challenge, let's say, to the DMA. So has the DMA, has the DMA changed the practices? Has the DMA? We don't know. And so for those who just want to copy and paste the DMA and say that's great, I mean, first, in the US, it's very much litigation driven, way more than in Europe. So you will not get rid of the litigation aspect of antitrust or anti-competitive practice. And then what are we talking about? Then if you have a kind of ex-ante type of regulations with all these ex-post litigation enforcement, you just don't have any kind of benefits, if any, of the DMA. So I think first, wait and see, do we have ex-ante regulation with ex-ante compliance? So far, it has been it's hard to answer positively. So if you end up having ex-ante regulations with traditional ex-post enforcement, just don't bother doing that. Do good cases, just enforce, identify good cases where you can see anti-competitive practice, put all the resources of the agencies in those cases, and just win those cases in court. That's it. But do you want to spend all the resources the agencies, like maybe the FTC is doing with the rulemaking process, on designing some rules that going to take years? That's the rulemaking process at the FTC, that will eventually will not be complied with, will not be enforced, and that eventually will need litigation in order to enforce. That sometimes you could have started earlier under the Sherman Act or the Clayton Act or any other antitrust law. So what are you looking? If it's time, like timely intervention, I mean, the more we spend, the more experience we get, the less I'm convinced that ex-ante regulations is about timely interventions. It's about timely drafting. It's not about timely enforcement. I mean, I wrote that many times. I say it won't be timely interventions. Yes, timely speed in drafting litigation. Yeah, that's easy. Speed in enforcing, it won't happen. So just my concern is that enforce properly current antitrust laws, identify good cases to win because you have massive amount of evidence and data that is robust, and just go for it.
Abba, would you like to ask to give anything here regarding the litigation aspect of the DMA?
Yes, actually, as opposed to antitrust in the EU, litigation and litigation venues are multiplied in the DMA. So there are loads of more venues for the gatekeepers to appeal the Commission's decisions within the DMA that there are in the antitrust sanctioning proceedings. Just as a quick note, and and going back to this idea we were talking about success and failure. We really know that if we have loads of cases before the General Court and the Court of Justice, it's going to be an utter failure. But the real question is, what is success looking like? And from my perspective, I believe the gatekeepers nor the European Commission knows the answer to that. So on one side, gatekeepers do not have sufficient legal certainty to know on what direction they should walk through and what pathways they should follow. And in fact, I believe that on the maybe the question of the essence is going to be this interpretation of proportionality. And in fact, now we already have, as Aurelien say, and we already have these appeals by Apple, Meta, and ByteDance on their designation decisions that the European Commission issued in September. And Apple has formulated that they are going, and one of the appeals to that decision was precisely how is one of the provisions proportional to its adaptation to Apple's business models in any fundamental way, insofar as it comprises all of the operating systems. So I believe it's at least going to be an interesting time to watch news and litigation venues.
Thanks so much. As I see, we have some more questions, and our time is almost up. So I would like to give the opportunity to Dario and Yusuf to add something if they still want, and then maybe we will have time for one more question before we wrap it up.
No, if I can add to something really quickly, but I believe that this is about litigation, one thing that's different, at least from Europe and Brazil, because in Europe you do have some like important digital cases in antitrust that has like some directly correlations with the obligations that we have in the DMA, and we do not have this in Brazil. So like we do not have any kind of solid case law of digital cases that were condemned in Brazil. The digital cases in Brazil, like most of them were dismissed, and the other ones are like being investigated nowadays. So if we take like this case law as one of the cause to implement the DMA, I don't see that's happening in Brazil. And like this is also one thing that I would like to see first, like an antitrust enforcement of classic antitrust tools analysis to see, okay, we do have a problem here, antitrust, and then we can like talk about some kind of markets regulation. But it's one thing that it's different from Brazil and Europe, and I believe that this is really important in order to jump for any kind of discussion of bill and other things. That's it.
Thank you. Yusuf, please go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I just want to talk a little bit about the Korean competition law, because I mean, one of the questions I think from the audience was kind of the mixture between US and the EU type of the regulations. Actually, Korean competition law is very unique. Actually, it's kind of mixture of the US type at the same time the EU, because we have some kind of the large conglomerates such as the Chaebol. Chaebol is like Samsung and Hyundai Motors. So from the historical point of view, I mean, well, Korean competition regime has focused on the large conglomerates. So we have really lots of the sector-specific regulations, such as the subcontract. Maybe you don't have the kind of the regulation, but like we have subcontract and large franchise and the large distributors. So we have some kind of the sort of the ex-ante regulations as well. And the targeting is like pipeline gatekeepers actually. So we already got used to the system of the gatekeeper and like designating. It's not really designating, but it's kind of the very formalistic. And also we have some kind of the data cases against the Google, such as the anti-steering and about the app distribution things. And so we, I don't really believe that the DMA kind of the ex-ante is necessary, because I mean, competition law is sufficient again to control abusive conduct, because I mean the examples is like Korea, because we have almost all the kind of the cases. So that's all of my comments. Thank you.
Okay, just very quickly, I would like to ask a final question from you all, and please respond in like 30 seconds if you can. What lessons should jurisdictions take away from the past decades regarding the US ex-post consumer welfare model versus regulatory approach of the European Union with regard to innovation? Aurelian, would like to start?
Yeah, sure. So why not? So I think first, the consumer welfare standard is not, or this approach is not listed in the DMA, and the aspect of consumer benefits is completely absent, or harm is completely absent in the DMA. I think it's very important to measure consumer harm, and of course, the consumer welfare standard is not as narrow as everybody may say, and it has to be flexible and look at non-price effects. But still, it's a very good standard, or at least criterion to look at, just to make sure that interventions do not harm consumers, because that's what we don't want, and we don't want something only tailored for the protection of few powerful competitors, because that's not the disrupting process of competition. It's more rent-seeking from regulations. And just to answer the questions, when it comes to the EU regulatory approach to EU innovation, first, it is not about, as I said, inter-platform competition. It just preserves the gatekeepers' position and just try to change marginally few features. So it's not like a disruptive innovation. So if we want incremental innovation, tiny innovations, yeah, why not? But it won't generate the innovation that Europe barely needs.
Okay, Abba, please.
Although 30 seconds is quite short for an academic, I'm trying to keep it short now. I would say that the lesson we have to learn is about that it is really risky to upscale the whole error cost framework from antitrust. So if we are going to handle with this dichotomy of over-enforcement and under-enforcement, we have to really focus on how we are going to measure the violation of these types of regulation, ex-ante regulation, so to benchmark them in the future. So I would say that would be my main takeaway, and also add on the need when drafting these regulatory instruments to have economically sound and factually sound assumptions boiled into them, and not non-economically sound presumptions that lead the way in these types of instruments.
Thank you. Dario?
Sure. So talking very briefly and also locally, I would say that I have a very skeptical view about like doing some kind of revolution. I believe that if something needs to be changed, a gradual movement would be a better one than doing out of nowhere, like changing all the system and how it works in the past. So in this sense, I would say, as I've been reading about CAGI, I believe we kept on this regular and the regular antitrust analysis that CAGI has been doing in the past, and I believe this is the right way to improve it. And for sure, as Arina said, we need to improve like the techniques that we use to date, but this is completely different from going from there to apart and do like any kind of revolution in the way that we'll be doing that, would for sure harm any kind of innovation or disruptive movement that would probably, creates way more problems than solutions.
Thank you. Yusuf, would you like to respond as well?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, well, again, DMA type of the ex-ante regulation is really, not really, useful for the innovation and everything. And second thing is like, first of all, I mean, enforcement agency need to have some kind of the good quality of the employees, because I mean, Korean Competition Authority has quite a number of the economists, also the engineers, so they have capability to investigate the jitter cases. So I think that's the first stage rather than the new type of the regulation. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for your great. So the discussion has shed light on the diverse nature of digital market regulation and the different approaches taken by each jurisdictions. Probably as a takeaway, we can see that while the DMA represents a pioneering effort to address issues on the digital markets, it's essential to recognize that Europe's regulatory environment and its digital landscape are very distinct from the other jurisdictions and other regions. As highlighted by all of you, there are existing solutions in the legal systems to tackle competition issues occurring on the digital markets. Therefore, probably a copycat approach might not be the most advantageous course of action by other jurisdictions. Thank you to our panelists for their valuable insights, and thank you for our audience for your engagement. Finally, I encourage the audience to stay tuned for the ITF's upcoming events.